America and Israel have spent years, billions of dollars and enormous military firepower to neutralize the biggest threat in Middle East, Iran. They took down its proxies, they weakened Hezbollah, they shattered Hamas, they bombed Iran's nuclear ambitions back decades.
The U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities.
Mission accomplished, right? Wrong. Because while the world was watching Iran, another power was quietly doing something far more dangerous. It was learning from Iran's mistakes and building something Iran could never build. A NATO membership card, a Western face, an army, drones the world envies, and the ambition of a reborn empire. Turkey is the new Iran. That quote from a former Israeli prime minister has sent shockwaves through NATO capitals, Washington and in New Delhi. And today we are going to decipher exactly that why this matters for every single person and why it is also important for understanding the new architecture of global power of present. Let's go. To understand why Turkey is rising, you first need to understand what fell. Iran spent decades building a so-called axis of resistance, a web of proxy militias across Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, militia in Iraq and Syria. American and Israeli operations over the past 2 years have systematically dismantled this network. Iran's military infrastructure has been battered by sustained strikes, its proxies have been neutralized or severely weakened, the regional boogeyman is no longer standing tall. And that has created a vacuum. And when a vacuum appears in geopolitics, someone always fills it. Nature abhors a vacuum, so does power politics. And standing at the edge of that vacuum is Ankara. So here is the key question. And this is the question that makes Turkey so uniquely dangerous. Is Turkey a friend of the West or an enemy? The answer is both. And that is exactly the problem. Turkey as an ally, NATO member since 1952, EU candidate nation, sold combat drones to Ukraine, hosts NATO bases and Incirlik air base. Let's look at Turkey as an adversary. Bought Russian S-400 missiles, supports Hamas openly, blocked Finland and Sweden from NATO for 18 months, and allows Russian financial flows. No other country in the world simultaneously demands Western defense integration while actively enabling the adversaries of that same alliance. Turkey is the only NATO member that does not consider Hamas a terrorist organization. President Erdogan invited Hamas to establish its presence in Istanbul back in 2011. Turkish citizenship was granted to Hamas's late political chief Ismail Haniya and his deputy Saleh al-Arouri. Turkey facilitated the flow of money and weapons through its financial infrastructure, emboldening Hamas to carry out the October 7 massacre of 2023. Think about that. A NATO country helped enable the worst terrorist attack on Israel in its history. And the S-400 missile system? Turkey insisted on buying the Russian-made missile defense system, knowing full well that operating it along the US F-35 stealth fighter would allow Moscow to learn how to shoot down American aircraft. Washington had to kick Turkey out of the F-35 program entirely. Erdogan did not apologize, he did not back down, rather he doubled down. Now let us talk about what gives Turkey its real teeth. Because unlike Iran, which relied on missiles and militias, Turkey is building what analysts call technological deterrence. Baykar, Turkey's drone manufacturing company, has become one of the world's leading exporters of unmanned aerial vehicles. The Bayraktar TB2 drone changed the outcome of wars in Azerbaijan, Ukraine and Libya. So it is not a weapon, it is a statement. And now Turkey is entering the hypersonic missile arena through Roketsan, a weapon that analysts describe as highly deterrent for Israel. And here is the critical difference from Iran. Iran tried to overwhelm Israelis' air defense with sheer number of missiles. Turkey does not need to do that. It has precision, it has technology, it has partnerships, including with Ukraine, which is now sharing battlefield-tested innovations with Ankara. Israel's concern is not just missiles. Analysts say Turkey is also playing energy diplomacy, dismantling the Eastern Mediterranean gas forum that was designed to isolate it, pulling Egypt away from Israeli influence and positioning Istanbul and Syria as energy hubs for Europe. If that happens, Israel's spice route through Haifa becomes irrelevant. That's an economic weapon more powerful than any missile. Now here's the part that we need to understand, and it needs to be burned into their memory. Because what is forming in Middle East right now is just a Turkey-Israel rivalry. Now here is the part that every viewer needs to burn into their memory. Because what is forming in Middle East right now is not just a Turkey-Israel rivalry, it is birth of two entirely new global alliances. Alliance Block 1. It has Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. It has nuclear power from Pakistan, Gulf wealth from Saudi Arabia, and look at where India sits. India is in Block 2 with Israel, UAE and Greece. India and Israel have deep defense ties. India and UAE have massive trade links. Please don't forget India-UAE free trade agreement. The competition stretching from South Asia to Eastern Mediterranean directly involves Indian strategic interests. And now it extends further to Horn of Africa, where Turkey and Israel are backing opposing sides in Somalia. The analyst of Washington Institute of the Near East Policy has put it bluntly, and I quote, "Maybe brace a little bit for not just Turkish-Israeli competition, but two alliances emerging, actors bringing different capabilities to each side." Now let's try to sum up and also be intellectually honest here. Turkey is not Iran. And it is important to understand why, and why that makes Turkey even more dangerous in some ways. Now, when you look at Iran, Iran had nuclear ambitions, ideological rigidity, especially after Islamic Revolution. It was a theocratic state. It was isolated from West, and it supported proxy militias such as Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, and it was economically sanctioned and was never a NATO member. But let us look at Turkey. No declared nuclear weapons, strategic, not ideological, but most importantly opportunist, democratic nominally, and a NATO member, EU candidate, supports states, not just proxies, economically active also across the globe. It is a Western face and Eastern ambitions. So Turkey lacks Iran's Quds force, the shadow army that ran Iran's proxy network. Turkey has no nuclear program, and Turkey does not operate through sectarian proxies the way Iran did. In fact, it is clear that Turkey prefers to work with the countries, not organizations. Instead of arming militias, Turkey is developing the Syrian National Army. It is training Syrian forces directly. It brought Ukraine and Syria into dialogue. Turkey wants to reshape the states around Israel, not destabilize them. And that is a fundamentally harder problem for Israel to deal with. Confronting a weakened, isolated Iran running militias is hard. Confronting a NATO member with economic power, technological capacity, international alliances, and a legitimate government sitting next door is a completely different and difficult challenge. And towards the end, let us talk about an incident that barely made the front pages, but should have shocked every Western capital. On March 9, 2026, Turkey positioned 6 American-made F-16 fighter jets in the occupied part of Cyprus. Why does this matter? First, Cyprus is a contested territory. Turkey has occupied the northern third of Cyprus since 1974 in what the international community calls an illegal occupation. Stationing jets there is a further militarization of disputed land. Second, Israel lies less than 300 miles from Cyprus. 6 combat aircrafts that close is not a military exercise, it is a clear message. Third, and most damaging, those are American-made F-16s. Turkey used weapons given by NATO against NATO's interest and potentially in violation of US law. Erdogan is using the tools of the alliance against the alliance itself. And remember, this same Turkey blocked Finland and Sweden from joining NATO for 18 months, using its veto to extract F-16 jets from Washington as a concession. It literally leveraged the security of NATO's eastern flank to get more weapons for itself. So finally, where does it go from here? Is there any way to manage the Turkey problem short of a direct confrontation? Analysts point out to one very interesting possibility: Donald Trump. Both Netanyahu and Erdogan have working relationships with Trump. And Turkish-American analyst Soner Kabte believes Trump could play peacemaker, telling Turkey Gaza is Israel's area and telling Israel Syria is Turkey's area. A deal, a dead end, an uncomfortable but functional division of influence might work out for both. There is also the Abraham Accords model, proof that the Middle East can normalize when economic opportunity and genuine desire for peace align. Those accords, a defining achievement of both Netanyahu's and Trump's first term, were not built on fear of a boogeyman. They were built on trade, investment, and shared interest. But here's the sobering and important reality. Netanyahu and Erdogan harbor a deep personal political animosity toward each other. Finding common ground between two leaders who genuinely despise each other is enormously difficult even for Trump. Before we close, let us take a look towards India, because this is not some faraway geopolitical drama. This has direct consequences for India as well. 1. Turkey is Pakistan's closest strategic partner. Erdogan has repeatedly raised Kashmir at the UN. Turkey and Pakistan have deep military ties. If Turkey becomes the region's new dominant power with Pakistan in its alliance, India's northwestern security environment becomes significantly more complex. 2. India is in the competing alliance with Israel, UAE and Greece. India's defense imports from Israel, the India-UAE trade corridor, the India-Greece maritime partnership all sits on the other side of this growing divide. India has a clear stake in the outcome as well. 3. Turkey's energy diplomacy in the Eastern Mediterranean directly challenges the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor, the spice route that India is building as an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Turkey wants to control the same energy and trade arteries, and these interests clash directly. So here's the bottom line. Turkey is not Iran, but it is no longer a reliable either. It has the potential to become yet another Iran or the new Iran. The danger is not in calling Turkey the new Iran. The danger is in continuing to treat Turkey as a normal NATO ally when it no longer behaves like one. Every concession NATO makes, Turkey banks on it. Every weapon NATO supplies, Turkey leverages. And every crisis the West faces, Turkey exploits. The Middle East is being redrawn, two alliances are forming, and at the center of it all is a nation with ancient empire's memory, a modern military capability, and a very ambitious president's vision. Whether that makes Turkey a partner or a threat will be one of the defining questions of this decade. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comment section. That was all from my side. Thank you so much.